Welcome to the first in a series of 4 podcasts about farm and business family relationships. I'm your host, Stewart Galloway, Senior Swine Nutritionist at Hubbard Feeds. Joining us is Andy Junkin, the founder of Stubborn.Farm. Our first podcast has a crazy title, Why Hang Your Business Plan Over the Toilet? So I'm going to turn it over to Andy and let him lead into this.
I just think that, you've seen today that I have a business plan of my own above the toilet.
I did.
And I think that it's what's really important for every farm family is that you have a common goals. And for a business plan to be written up and 30 pages thick and sitting in a filing cabinet, you might as well have it in the garbage because one person might have read it, one person might have spent a lot of time writing it, but unless everybody on the farm is buying into the concepts and has the same goals, it's absolutely critical. I mean, and too often farm families, when I walk onto farm families for the last 15 years, everybody's butting heads and pulling the farm in different directions. And a good analogy to this is like a father, son, and a daughter. They decide to finally get somebody to do chores for them, and they go on vacation, and they all jump in the truck, and the daughter, the son, he gets out of the house, and he throws the skis in the back of the truck because he wants to drive out to Colorado and go skiing. And the daughter, she comes out with her Mardi Gras beads, and she wants to go down to New Orleans. And the father, he comes out, he's the last one to leave the house, and he's got nothing but flip-flops and Speedos on because he wants to drive as far south down to Florida until the snow doesn't matter and they can just step out of the truck with his Speedos on. But they don't talk about where they want to go. And for the first couple hours, it's just like the first couple of years of the kids coming home to the farm. They got the music blaring, everybody's having a good time. They're just got the freedom of the road. And then after 12 hours, things start to get a little bit tense. The father was taking over the wheel. He's driving south. Suddenly the son, he didn't know what the old man was doing driving south, and so he gets behind the wheel and he heads west. But the father doesn't want to say anything. He's disgruntled. And then the daughter drives southwest, and they spend the week. They should have been there in 12 hours, but nobody says anything. And they end up, after a week, they're out of gas. They don't have any cash. They're stuck on the side of the road in Muskogee, Oklahoma. And I don't know if you've ever been in Muskogee, Oklahoma, but ain't nothing worth singing about. And that's the way it is with a lot of farm families, is that we get never talking about our goals, and we're always pulling the farm in different directions, and we get to a destination nobody wants to be, and we run out of cash. And that's because we all fall short. Now, had they had a 5-minute conversation, the father, the last thing he wanted to do was sit on a snowbank in Colorado. He was tired of the cold weather. He wanted to go south to somewhere where it was warm. Last thing the son wanted to do was sit and watch, a bunch of senior citizens on a beach in Florida, right? And so they had to come to an agreement. They could have all agreed upon going to Nashville, Tennessee, right? There's something fun for everybody there in Nashville, Tennessee. They could have had that 5-minute conversation, and instead they spent the whole week bickering. And I think that's the analogy is that if you as a family can have a conversation where you want the farm to go and grow, and how are you going to get there as far as a map. A business plan is simply a map. And when you get off course, it's easy to correct because you all agree on the common destination. That's what a business plan is to me, and I think it's very simple. It's important for the farm family to have a discussion about where's your Nashville, where's your true north.
That leads us to the idea then of a mission statement or a vision statement. I know you're a big proponent of that. Can you talk a little more about how you work with farm families about mission and vision statements?
Well, I think for myself, my own experience was that my dad, the year I came home from college back in 1996, my dad plowed down my crops. And that's because, I wondered a long time what I had done wrong. And when young lads come home from agriculture college, they got 1,001 ideas as to how to improve the operation. And at some point in time, these suggestions for change are seen by mom and dad as criticism of past management decisions. And what I seen was that when I went home to farm, I talked about the what and the how we were going to farm. I didn't talk about the why. And the first conversation I needed to have with my dad, the truth was for our farm, we were losing money. We had been losing money for a long time. Our cost of production was $1.20 per pound of beef, and we were getting paid 83 cents a pound on the markets. And my dad and I needed to get an absolute truth, and the absolute truth of our farm was we needed to get our cost of production down to 80 cents. And until we both bought into that agreement about an absolute truth, any suggestion for change I had on the farm, such as going into pasture management, was seen as criticism of what Mom and Dad had done in the past. And, I was focused on the what, and we needed to get an absolute truth, which is the why for our operation. So I think every farm family, you need an absolute truth that everybody can buy into, and then you eliminate 50% of your bickering.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I've read through and been trained on and actually used with the peer group a few years ago was a concept called 2143. And it's a concept for business planning that was designed by Aidan Connolly when he was at Alltech. And I really like this. If we think about a normal approach of looking at 1, 2, 3, 4 being where have we been? Number 2 is where are we? Number 3 is how are we going to go forward? And number 4 is what's our goal? Aidan turned that all around and said, let's start with number 2. Let's identify where are we at today, and we understand that. Number 1 is where have we been, and that's a very small piece of the discussion because we don't want to just go back to, it's the good old days, how come we can't have those anymore,
Yeah.
or wallowing in something from the past. So we spend more time on the present, a little bit on the past. Then the really important factor there is where do we want to be? Because if we just head down the road, like your example of the 3, where are they going to end up? We don't know without a goal. So we set the goal as number 4. Then we talk about the roads to get there. What are the paths to get to that goal that we have? And I think that's part of what you're talking about with a vision statement and a mission statement of unified plan going forward.
Yeah, and I agree with that. The concern I have with most business plans is that the business lies. And the thing is that if you have a son or a daughter that goes off to executive training meeting, and they write a business plan, and they come home to it. The question is, does Uncle Bill and Grandpa, have they bought into that business plan? Or has just one person written that business plan? Mm-hmm. And what's really important is that everybody's on the same page as to the goals. And it's got to be, for a farm family, it's got to be so simple. I'll give you an example. I had a farm family, and they had actually found out from the bank that the bank was going to take the farm. Essentially what had happened was the father and the grandpa died when the son was 53, and he had been told for many, many years, no, no, no to all these ideas. So they went and with the father and the grandsons, went and did all those things grandpa told them not to do. And 7 years later, they were in a situation where their debt to equity ratio was out of whack, and they went to go buy the farm across the road. And the bank, there were some mistakes with the farm financials were very complicated, and they had actually double counted some income and not counted some costs, and it looked very fraudulent. And the bank said they had a meeting with the bank in the middle of June. They had shut down planting soybeans to meet with the banker because they needed to buy the farm across the road, and they thought it was just going to be a meeting with the. They had actually been Farm Family of the Year in their region, and were seen as highly successful. And so they thought it was just going to be a public relations with their banker and their banker's boss. And their banker's boss said, no, not only are we not going to give you this loan, we're going to take your farm unless you turn around your financials. And their cost of production was over $7. And it was $7 corn that day. It was 2012. And they had to get their cost of production down to $4 within a year. And there was actually the situation on that farm was they found this, they had this meeting, and the father, he was in the pickup truck, and he said to his son, the 2 pickup trucks met. He said, give me your hand. He said, dropped a shotgun shell in his son's hand. He says, I almost used that myself an hour ago. You boys better get this situation sorted out. And he flew off in the night. And the truth was that Dad was part of the responsibility for them getting in the situation that they were. But he was blaming his sons and everybody but himself. And the next morning, that's when I got the call, and I knew these guys from school. And this is back in 2012. And I sat down with these guys, and they had a really nice shop. They had just built it, and they had a boardroom set up, and they weren't into arguing, and they just wanted a finger point as to who was to blame for the problems. And I tried to mediate the meeting, and it was going nowhere. And I got up, and I took I went to use the washroom, came back, and I grabbed a spray paint can off the bench of the shop, and grabbed it and spray painted $4. And what had happened about 20 minutes before was the son said, well, how the hell does the bank expect us to produce corn for $4 if they say our cost per production is $7? That's impossible. And the one brother who was close to 300 pounds, he's a big man, grabbed me by the shoulder and says, what the F are you doing with my shop? I said, this ain't your shop. It's the bank's. You got a year to earn it back. Mm-hmm. And what I had done was spray paint $4. And that goal, that became their business plan. That became their vision statement, right? And every decision based on that farm, it became based on, like, the thing is that from that moment, he almost punched me clear, like, but you could see in his light in his eyes. And 6 weeks later, we sat down with them and 6 weeks later, he was actually living on a farm that they had bought for $1 million more than what they could afford. It had a nice house on it. It had 50 acres, 23 acres workable. They said that they bought it for the land, and because it was right beside their farm, basically it had $1 million house on it. And in that meeting, he said, we're going to sell this farm that I live on, and we're going to, they had some serious inflation at that time, and sell it for a profit. He says, I'll move into Grandma's house. And Grandma's house was built in 1900. It was basically a drafty old shack. He said, why is that? Because $4 on the side of the shed. And Dad had refused to give up any equipment. They had gone no-till about 7 years before, and he refused to give up all any conventional tillage equipment. They had 3 discs, and they had actually had to build extra shed space. And he says, well, you never know when you use it. And he actually let that equipment go. Why was that? Because of one number on the side of the shed. All decisions on that number. And there was a time that about 6 weeks after that family meeting, where the 2 brothers got into accusing each other for problems, and they got in a scuffling on the gravel outside of the shop. And the sister, the same brother that almost punched me, he was on top of his younger brother. He was a big man. He's about to punch him, and the sister-in-law, who he hated, yelled across the gravel yard. She says, "What's this got to do with $4 corn?" And that stopped the fight. And I think the thing is, for every family farm, not to talk too much here, Stu, but the thing is that if you can get your mission and vision statement so simple that you can yell it across a yard and it's used to settle an argument, then you've got a plan. You've got a mission and vision statement. If it's a 3-paragraph BS that you forget 3 weeks after you had a family meeting, then you don't have a mission and vision statement. Mm-hmm. And I think it needs to be that simple.
You know, I'm going to be sharing on these podcasts some of my experiences as well. And I returned home after college to farm with my grandfather and his son-in-law, my father. So 3 generations in the business, and that's going to come up in some of the other podcasts along the way too. We had no business plan. My grandfather was, like many of the farmers you've probably worked with, he firmly believed that you get up and you work hard every day and you'll be successful. He got up and he worked hard every day and he was successful, but there wasn't a plan. And in the end, that was part of the reason I'm not farming, is because of that. How do you get, particularly these farms where there's 3 generations still in the business, how do you start getting them to the point where they can write the $4 on the door?
Well, you just got to come to an absolute truth. You've got to come to an absolute truth, and it's got to be something that's everybody's got to really think deeply about why they actually farm. And I see, you got to ask why. And a lot of farmers, they will think that it's a silly conversation to have. Like that farm family, I was trying to, before I spray painted that on the side of the shop, get them talking about the mission vision statement. They thought that was, a bunch of executive coaching BS, right? But for you to have something so simple that everybody can remember, I mean, it's got to be sticky and it's got to be memorable. Like I've got a farm family that did a really good job. They have a 30-30 rifle, and they have it hanging above the shop door. And their vision statement, or their mission statement is 30-30 and everybody goes home happy. So for that farm family, they want to be in the bottom 30% as far as cost of production, and they look at the state metrics, right? On a yearly basis, they can look at the state average, and they can see if they're in the bottom 30%. And then they do custom combining, and they want to know if they're in the top 30% in their county for yield average. And then the key line is everyone goes home happy. So every day they have to ask themselves, am I going home happy? And is my business partner going home happy? Or was I a jerk to work with? Mm-hmm. And something simple like that basically only 5 words, it changed their whole operation around, because they're constantly bickering about different production goals, different ways they work together. And that was the acid test. And I think what a mission and vision statement has to be is, for those that you don't know, mission statement is basically, what do you do for a living? What do you do day in, day out that makes your farm successful? And what's your competitive advantage? For your grandpa, it was hard work, but I think what's really important is for every farm to really define what makes them different than the neighbors down the road. And what you got to do, what's the biggest challenge? That's the biggest thing, is don't tell me in your mission statement what's easy for you guys to do. You got to define for yourself what's tough to do, that you got to do. You got to be stubborn at as a family in order to get the results. And then the vision statement's got to be defining, what's the farm going to look like 10 years down the road. For that farm family, they wanted to get their cost of production from $7 corn down to $4. It took the next year they got their cost of production down to $4.50, and the bank was willing to work with them. They actually got their cost of production down to $3.25 just a few years ago. That's when last time I talked to them, and they were able to do that because they one number on the side of the shop. It's got to be in a place that's prominent. And, I just have a farm family. I just got them to put 10%, and they wanted, for them, the 10% was they had to be in the top 10% of the dairy industry in order to be able to survive. And the father said, well, why would I put that on my door? I said, every time you look at that, that's going to piss you off. It's going to be in your face, and you're always going to be asking yourself, am I in the top 10% as far as production, as far as profitability, as far as somebody to work with? And, if your family can get such a simple goal that every time you open a door and it pisses you off, it will change your whole results, and you'll be able to buy a new door. And as I said to this family, look, if you get in the top 10 percentile, you'll be able to buy a new door in 2 years' time. If you don't, the farm's going to own it.
These are great examples. I do want to bounce off the 30-30 and everybody going home happy as we wrap up this podcast, and that is the whole area of mental health. I think how many people are not happy, whether it's just mild depression. We all have stresses. Farming stresses never end, and then that leads into some serious mental health conditions and situations that can impact the family and the business. What have you seen, and how are you working more with the mental health side of it than maybe you were even a few years ago?
Well, I would say that the 25% of farm families, somebody on that, 25% of farmers, and somebody's got mental health issues. And the 2 most common things are either depression or anxiety. And basically, for those of you that don't know, anxiety is worrying about the future. And the easiest way to eliminate anxiety within ever being a problem on your farm is to have a clear and transparent plan where all the partners buy into it, and eliminate the butting heads and pulling the farm in different directions. If you don't know what the future is, it's hard to get out of bed in the morning. And the other thing is, for depression, too often we don't really have a dashboard for ourselves as to how we're actually doing. And we tend to, as farmers, we deal with problems. That's what you do for a living. And the problem is we get so infatuated with the problems that we only see problems, we don't see the opportunities. And you've got to define what the opportunities for your farm is, what you're working towards, and more importantly, be able to gauge as to how you're actually doing. And more importantly, have discussions on a regular basis with your partners as to what do we got to tweak in order to fix these production problems or problems in how we work together in order to actually create a bright future. And I think business planning is the foundation of it. I mean, I don't think there's any shame to a farmer. I'm really glad that mental health is a more discussed topic. The problem I have with the medical industry is that, just look at diabetes, for instance. There's people that have type 1 diabetes, that's a genetic trait. There's a lot of people out there that have type 2 diabetes that's caused by stress in the environment. And the solution that the medical industry has these days is giving out pills. They don't have a discussion about, I take heart medication for high blood pressure. Doctor says, oh, it's just a genetic thing. The truth is based on the fact that I work 14 hours a day and I'm not exercising, right? Or I don't have a proper diet. Didn't talk to me about that. And I think that in same thing with mental health, we don't talk about the environment. And I think that you cannot control whether or not you have a genetic influence. And if you have a genetic influence, the same as taking medication for diabetes, there's no shame in it, right? But the questions we got to have within the farm family environment is how do we eliminate as much stress as possible? How do we eliminate as much stress as far as anxiety and depression, which are the two common issues of mental health? And I think having a common business plan that everybody's working towards is a game changer. And I think that it should be such a simple document that everybody can see it. It's got to be something that's on a shop door. One thing I really believe in is that just before we wrap up here, is you got to have a common plan and then 10 key actions of what you got to change in your operation. As far as what are 10 things that are going to change on your operation, get a shopping list for over the next 5 years. What are we going to purchase and acquire? What kind of changes we're going to have in our line of equipment, what we do as far as actions on the farm. And then also talk about 10 key production metrics. And if you can get all your partners really focused on making those changes, and everybody agrees on what are the 10 things that really help us get our cost production down to $4, or what would it be for a hog operation? What would you have for what's a common goal that you see with hog operations?
Well, we're looking at increased sow productivity. Probably the biggest one today is health and decreased mortality and more full value pigs to sell.
And so if you can have like a conversation on a regular basis about mortality, if you can have a conversation because you have a business plan in place, if you can go over that business plan once a month and say, okay, where are we not hitting our goals? Mm-hmm. And have a conversation instead of blaming each other, have a constructive conversation, problem solving. It can change the whole anxiety and depression on the family farm. It's a game changer.
I would agree, because you've got the enterprise of the sows, the nursery, and the finishers, and you may have different people involved in those. And you've got different outside influences all pointing fingers at everybody, and we just have to all sit down together and talk through it.
Yeah, and proactive problem solving.
Very much.
But it's got to start with having a mission and vision statement. So we'll talk about that more in detail in the next podcast.
Exactly. Thank you all for watching us. As we talk about these, we're going to be talking about differing business philosophies on a farm. We're going to be talking about work-life balance, and we're going to be talking about succession planning. So thank you for joining us.